let us get started here. My new author brand that I have courtesy of Cherie Lynn Force, get her name right, created this logo for me. So I'm showing off the world of the great job Cherie does. Story Jazz. Like I did mention to Linda earlier, I am by nature a pantser, and I'm starting to call it story jazz, that you create in the moment like great improvisational jazz. Hopefully, I'm somewhere close to great. And we're going to look today at where do I sell this thing, finding great markets for your short stories. Now, selling is another thing, but finding markets, we've got some pretty concrete steps we can do. And I want to share some of them with you.
You gotta listen. And goody two-shoes.
And now, as I'm sure that somebody out there has said, time to pay for the suit.
All right, some of you know old Star Trek, so you remember this scene from City on the Edge of Forever. And this is the brief moment where you pay for the soup. I'm giving these classes away. I have never charged for a class in my writing career, but I'm going to briefly mention a couple of my books. So maybe you'll find these cool and you'll think that, hey, I seem to know what I'm talking about, so you want to look at those. Today I Am Carrie was my first novel, published with Baen in 2019, and is the story of 4 generations of a family as told by the android they adopt. It starts out as a caretaker for the grandmother in late stages Alzheimer's. After she passes away, it essentially grows up with her granddaughter because the android is in some sense at an emotional level of a 4-year-old, at an intellectual level. I mean, it's very smart programmed, but its understanding of what humanity is like is limited, and it grows along with her. So we see 80 years of this family through the android's eyes. So that's for readers in general. The one on the right, Making Story Models, is aimed specifically at you, my fellow writers. It's techniques for visualizing your stories, ways to draw diagrams and pictures to help think through story problems, visual outlines, or even just visual scenes that you're trying to figure out a solution to. So that's what that book is about. Last week actually drew heavily from Making Story Models. This week is much more on the business side, so it doesn't draw directly from it, but I hope you would find something interesting and useful in the book anyway. That was one that I originally started writing as something I thought Dave Wolverton would appreciate, and I had the privilege to present the early sessions of what became that book to his Apex writing group. Okay, we're going to talk today and in all of my sessions about some things that are tools, not rules. I hate it when somebody tries to tell you the rule for how to write. As far as I'm concerned, there's literally only one unbreakable rule, which is you got to write. Let's not talk to those people who are trying to let AI do all their writing. You have to write. Any other rule you can come up with that somebody says, this is the one true path that you must follow, I'll find a dozen bestsellers that didn't follow it. That doesn't mean you can't learn tools. Tools are good. And early on, you might treat a tool like a rule when you're trying to learn it, but nothing I say is going to be a rule, even if in my bombastic nature, I call it a rule. It's still a tool. So anytime I say this is the thing you must do, realize there's always an except or unless or a but to that. Okay. So to talk about selling the stories and what you want to do with your stories, we really kind of need to talk about dreams versus goals and identifying what are the difference. I draw this from Dean Wesley Smith, who is a Superstars presenter at times, a Writers of the Future judge, and who is an extremely successful writer with a long career and also a great instructor. Dean draws a distinction between dreams and goals. Dreams are things that would be so cool, but they're out of your control. I want to win a Dragon Award. That's great. I appreciate that. But you're not the 80,000 people who are voting for the dragon. That's out of your control. Dreams can be motivating, but they are not achievable in themselves. A goal is something you could work on. So, if you want to win that Dragon Award, you have to finish the book. You have to write a good book. You have to publish the book. Those are things you have some more control over. If you're self-publishing, you have a lot of control over the publishing. If not, you have to submit to publishers, and your dream is that they will buy it. So dreams are not something you can actually put together a plan and achieve. Goals are. But interestingly enough, when you start meeting your goals, dreams become attainable. So one of the things I want you to think about in terms of markets for your work is first identifying your goals. And only you can decide what your goals are. Nobody else can. Your goals may not be my goals. Barry Longyear, one of my favorite writers going all the way back to the 70s, Barry had a phenomenal launch to his career. If you're familiar with the movie Enemy Mine, that was based on one of his stories. Don't tell him you like the movie because he kind of thought Hollywood ruined his ending. But aside from that, it's a very popular movie. He did a lot of good things. He was the first person to achieve what we have come to call the Triple Crown in science fiction awards. He got the Hugo and the Nebula and the John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer, which is only available in your first 2 years of publishing. He got all three for his story Enemy Mine. So inside of his first 2 years of publishing, he got the 3 top awards in the field. And he went to his hotel that night afterwards, after all the celebration, and was sitting up there deciding if that was the night he was going to kill himself. Because he knew he was going to eventually. He just didn't know if he would now. He, at one point, the only thing that saved him was he realized sitting in his office back home with the gun in his mouth that his wife would have to clean up the mess, and he couldn't do that to her. Barry talks about this extensively. I'm not sharing secrets, that he is an addict, alcohol and pills and you name it, and had to go through a long period of recovery. And part of that was because he had set his goals up to be, this fame and fortune and success with all this writing will make me happy and make all my problems go away, and it didn't. Today, Barry's goals are 1. He wants to write stories that matter to him. And if you buy his stories and they matter to you, he's very happy for you and he's glad he could help. But Barry's single solitary goal is he has to be proud of the work. And he's not quite where he was back then on top of the field. He is practically forgotten 40 years later. Yeah, 40 plus years later, practically forgotten. But the work he's doing is the work he thinks is most important. And maybe some of it will come back in the form of money. They're talking about redoing Enemy Mine. He's got his fingers crossed that it will happen, and this time they'll do a better job of it. But Barry has redefined his goals to be very much that you are writing the stories that matter to you when they matter. That's one set of goals. You need to look at your goals. Having fun? Obviously, my opinion, if you're not having fun, there are better ways to torment yourself than writing, because it's hard work, except that it's also fun, for me at least. To be read, okay? Widely read is different from being read. You can be read by 3 people and feel like, hey, you shared your story with them. And that's often how we start out. To be read by the right people is another goal yet. And that now comes down to there is an audience you feel you want to reach. Be appreciated, change lives and minds, famous, make money, make lots of money. Good luck on that goal. To quit your day job, good luck on that goal too. Very few of us ever get away with that. To control my work, that's kind of Barry's goal, that he is working on what matters to him. I honestly don't care what your goals are. I think it is important for you to answer that question of what your goals are. And that goals may change over time. That a goal of being read becomes, I want to be widely read, or I want to change lives and minds, or whatever. So keep tracks, do a goal inventory once in a while. Because the answer to how do I sell this thing, The right answer can depend upon your goals. And part of your goals, going back to what Barry says, James Owen, for those of you who've been to Superstars or seen him in other venues, he talks about never let what you want, and I'll butcher the quote, but never let what you want be pushed aside by what you want right now. Oh, there's the quote. Here I'm quoting James from memory. Never give up on what you want for what you want right now. And he tells many stories about times where he was tempted to do something because it would be convenient and an easy path and maybe make some money. And sometimes he needed it too, but it got him off the path of what he did. And this is important, I believe, because your stories, you can easily give them away in all sorts of ways that don't actually accomplish your goals, or they might. Again, if your major goal is to be read, giving them away is one way to do that. But your stories have value. You decide what that value is for you and how to pursue your goals. This gets more complicated for some of you depending on the support structure you have, family and friends, and how much they support you in this creative endeavor. Some of you have got really wonderful family and friends, very supportive. Some of you don't. And my sadness is immense for those of you who don't, for people who are undercutting your goals. And it's a complicated situation because you are part of their lives and vice versa. So not meeting their expectations can kind of feel like you're letting them down. But you also have obligations to yourself, going back to Barry. You have obligations to your writing, the reasons why you're writing. And so sometimes people will try to push you into other goals or push you into other paths towards your goals. I know one writer, one of many, but I know one writer who got very involved with a spouse in the creative endeavors and then got a divorce. And now all those endeavors tied up with that spouse are really complicated. So that writer has to go and pursue other creative options because fighting over those particular titles is more work and more post-domestic stress and more family strife than that writer wants. Okay. So we're going to be talking about your rights under copyright. And I want to make sure that everyone is familiar with the very, very basics of rights, because this matters a lot too in how you find readers for your work. If you are looking strictly at monetary value, the most important thing is first rights. The first time your story appears anywhere is worth more to publishers, and therefore should be worth more to you, than anywhere else. Now, I'll come back with exceptions where, yeah, but maybe you've got other reasons for it. But first rights, particularly first English language text rights worldwide, is worth a lot. If you're looking at short fiction in the science fiction field, the standard, not everybody meets the standard is that first rights are worth 8 cents per word. Do a 2,000 word story times 8, so that's 16,000 cents. So that's 1,600 dimes, so that's $16. The same story reprinted is generally worth a penny a word. So you've cut your pay potential by 7/8. So that doesn't mean you can't make some money on that. But realize that those subsidiary rights are not nearly in the same category as their first rights unless you strike gold. And I confess I have struck gold. I am not going to say I earned it, deserved it. I happened to have lightning strike and it took off and it surprised the heck out of me. I wrote a story called Today I Am Paul, a short story that appeared in Clarkesworld. Clarkesworld paid pro rates in science fiction. At that time, that was 6 cents per word. They paid me 6 cents per word for that. That story, I struck lightning. Again, I'm not claiming that I was some genius, but I hit on something that appealed to people a lot. And we have Jenna joining the meeting. Hello, Jenna, joining us. So that story struck a nerve in the community and took off so that it got selected for 4 different year's best science fiction collections. Those are all reprints, secondary rights. So that's a penny a word. But because I happen to get 4 of them, that's now 4 cents per word total for those reprints. In the meanwhile, Neil Clark, who was the editor for Clarkesworld, which it first appeared, said, I want that also in this new anthology I'm doing, which is was it More Human Than Human? I forget if that was the right one. I've been in one with that title, and I think that was Neil. So there's another penny a word. And then I struck gold again. I struck gold. That story has been translated into 8 different languages around the world. Now, I didn't get a penny a word necessarily because some of the foreign markets don't have a lot of money to throw around. Some of them I got $10 for the entire story to be translated into their language. Cherie is joining us. So I didn't necessarily make the penny a word on those, but I made some, except for the one. There was one that what they wanted for the $10 was that I filled out in a piece of paper sending through the mail. I fill out a complicated piece of paper that involved my entire records for my bank, for the account numbers and routing numbers and everything else. And I said, you know what? I can't give that out for $10. So I accidentally lost that piece of paper. They still reprinted it in, I think that was Polish. So it got translated, but I just decided that I didn't need to get paid. But if you start adding up the numbers, you're starting to see that, oh, I am now getting up to the point where I'm getting paid more for the reprints of this story than I am for the original. So keeping track of those secondary rights, they could come in really handy down the road. But first you have to sell the first rights, and you have to be careful not to lose the first rights because there are ways you can lose them. Dean Wesley Smith, who I've already mentioned once, he has some observations on copyright. If you go to his blog for Dean Wesley Smith, he talks about these in great specific detail, but I'll get you the high-level overview. The first is the rights pie. Under copyright law in the US and in any country under the Berne Convention, which is most of what we think of as the West these days, under the Berne Convention, you never sell a story. You lease rights for a limited period. Now, if your contract stinks, those rights could be every single right I have, and the period could be until 75 years after I'm dead. Don't sign contracts like that. I've got a presentation coming up on bad contracts. Don't sign contracts like that. What you have is a pie that can be sliced thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. It can be for how long the rights are let out. It can be what language the rights are in. It can be what format the story's in. It could be, I could say that I am leasing you the rights to reprint this story in a newspaper in New Jersey, and nobody else can print this story in a newspaper in New Jersey for the duration of this contract. You can slice these rights very, very small, and Dean's argument is never give more of the pie than you really need to close the deal. Now, obviously, you feel like I'm the author and they're the publisher or the magazine publisher or whatever. They've got all this clout, so I don't have much room to dictate to them. You have more than you think if you're willing to walk away and say no. Going back to Barry Longyear, he wants the story to be what he wants it to be, the way he wants it to be. And Barry has learned to say no. Now, that's very hard to do when you are an author who's trying to make this sale, trying to grab some readers, trying to get some attention. It's not easy, but I have walked away from deals where I said, no, that's not a good one. I have also broken every rule I have and given away the complete rights to 3 short stories. And I did that because I'm not allowed to say how much the money was for them, but my eyes are still popping at the amount. Amazon/Audible was looking for some short reads, somewhere in the neighborhood of 850 words. And my agent contacted me and said, can you do these? And I said, let me throw together some proposals. And they accepted all 3 of them. And those 3 stories I can never publish again anywhere in any format because I gave them to Amazon. And happily, I think they're great audio productions, but I gave them to Amazon and for money that I just didn't complain at all. So even though, remember I said tools, not rules, even though I would say as a rule, never give away your rights, clearly I did in those very specific cases. So knowing what you're giving away is a big part of Dean's lesson. Another part is what he calls the magic bakery. Remember that you can license these rights for a specific period of time. So Dean is describing your inventory of stories as a bakery where you can take a pie off the shelf or even just a slice off the pie off the shelf and give it to somebody in exchange for payment. And at some time it reappears back on your shelf. So now you can give it away again. And it won't be first rights now. Now it's secondary rights because somebody else already ate that pie once. But it's back on your shelf. So keeping track of these rights can be a really, really powerful way of adding to your long-term income. Not immediate, but long-term. I've lost track of how much I've made off of Today I Am Paul at this point, but it is something in the neighborhood of 3 times what was originally paid for because I just struck lightning with that one. So keeping track of your secondary rights and keeping track of the magic bakery that they come back is really good for your long term, even if it may make you walk away from deals in your short term. For those of you who joined a little later, and I'm not chastising, I'm just repeating something I said before we started. I do better in conversation mode than in presentation mode. So if I come up with something and you have questions, go ahead and ask them immediately. Shout out because I might not see hands raised and let me know. And Dean's last bit of advice on this general topic is to learn copyright. And it's a huge topic. And I'm not qualified to teach more than just a little tiny slice of it. He recommends a book called The Copyright Handbook. There's a new version every few years. It is a boat anchor of a book. It's huge, but it starts out with some really good and relevant stuff and gets deeper from there. So when we're talking about places for your fiction to go, think about the rights to the fiction. And I'm going to give you some rules that, again, aren't really rules, they're tools, decisions for you to make. All right, so we start with agents. First of all, you have to have an agent, and then an agent who's going to represent your short fiction. And the answer to that for me is one word: no. It's not going to happen. All right, I know of a few people it has happened for, but when you look at the math, it really isn't going to happen. First, you have to find the agent who is willing to represent you, and then look at the math. A really good short story sale is about $2,000. A typical agent cut on a sale is 15%, so that's $300. How hard is that agent going to work for $300? At the same time, they could be trying to sell your novel, which might end up with, I don't know, $10,000 advance, and might then proceed to have sales beyond that, and that's what they want to sell. In my experience, when an agent offers to represent your short fiction, it is a courtesy for a client. They want to have for the novels. It is not really as much representation as you think. And I think you can do anything that they can do for the most part. Now, if you're the exception, if you've got an agent who wants to represent your stuff, great. I think you're going to find you're still out there doing a lot of the marketing. I have an agent for my novels, and I still have to sometimes market the novels to places he hasn't thought about. So the agent is a nice dream. I don't know how many people have ever had an agent for their short fiction. All right, so we'll get past the agent. Now we get into the do-it-yourself. And this is simultaneously easiest and really hard. So remember what I said about goals. Deciding what your goals are. Doing it yourself will meet some goals and not others. So the first one is very straightforward, which is you publish to social media. Maybe you're publishing Flash, maybe you're publishing longer. You publish to your blog, your Twitter, your YouTube, your whatever. You're not going to make money this way unless you build enough of a following that you can draw advertisers. And I know there are people pulling that off. It's pretty rare. It's going to take a lot of work. You're going to build your readership slowly, but you are going to build a readership. Since she happens to have joined us, we have Jenna produces a flash fiction piece every Wednesday and puts it to her social media. And they are wonderful little stories, sometimes whimsy, sometimes a little dread, sometimes magic. This is part of her trying to make the community of readers and writers familiar with her, to know her work and come to like her work. So for Jenna, that is accomplishing a goal of she wants people to know her work. It also is potentially accomplishing a goal of promoting her work to other people for larger markets. So this approach finds readers slowly. I don't know if Jenna wants to speak to how big her readership is at this point. I've been watching like 4 years now, I think, that I've been seeing this. Nope. Okay. It is a slow buildup of readers and slow buildup of fans. You need to have fans who love it enough that they start sharing it. On the other hand, it can be very fast feedback. If people like a story, they click that like and maybe they leave a comment. If people don't like a story, they click that frowny face and they leave a comment. So the almost instant feedback has its ups and minuses, ups and downs. Does it meet your goals? It's meeting some goals for Jenna. There are places where I give away a story because it's a story I want to have people look at because I got something else I want them to look at. I am starting next weekend a variation of the Instant Story Show, which is a presentation I've given multiple times at FireCon, where Jenna is one of the organizers. The Instant Story Show is they give me a prompt, and for an hour I dictate a story live. Next weekend, I'm doing the Instant Bard, which is shorter stories with more audience interaction. And they're going to be like 5-10 minutes with a cliffhanger or a punchline. I'm going to be putting all of those up on the website so that people who saw me there, they have a postcard with a QR code to go read that story that they saw performed live. And oh, by the way, here are some other things I think you would like. So I'm giving those away largely because I want their attention on my other works. That's some of my goals that I expect this to meet.
Martin,
Yeah.
so when you post on social media, does that count as first rights? And then what does that mean for the secondary rights?
Okay. Let me give you the practical answer, and then I'll go into some details why. The practical answer is yes. That essentially I have given away first rights. So if I had something I thought was really hot, I might not do that. On the other hand, there's a guy you might have heard of by the name of Andy Weir, who had a small little book called The Martian turned into a movie by Ridley Scott. The story behind The Martian, he was literally publishing it on his blog for his few readers to share. He was actually a web cartoonist who did novels on the side. And he was posting it on his blog just for people to share and to give feedback because he had a lot of real good technical geeks in his readership. And he was just doing that, giving it away. And at one point, one of his readers said, "You've got all of these blog posts and they're in reverse order because that's the way blogs do it and everything. Couldn't you just turn that into a Kindle book?" And he'd never really looked at it. And he said, "Well, I suppose." And he went through the effort to format it as a Kindle book and put it up. And Amazon, unless you pull some tricks with competitive pricing, Amazon doesn't want you posting free stuff. So he said, "Okay, I can't make it free. I'm making it 99 cents. I'm sorry. I'd like to give it to you for free, but this is the limits I can do." And in a relatively short span of time, it became the #1 paid ebook for science fiction on all of Amazon. It turned into a monster because he made it available. Notice I have not in anywhere in that story mentioned rights. He just put it up there and people saw it and liked it and bought it. And Amazon, they don't care about first rights. Now, there are interesting things that a publisher, I forget his publisher, might have been Crown, came to him and said, "Wow, you're doing that number of sales with an ebook? We want to do the print book for this." Notice they didn't mention anything about first rights. I'll get back to this, why they didn't. They just cared about, they thought that we could sell lots of print copies. And of course, we'll sell the ebook too. And remember Dean and the Magic Bakery and controlling what you license. And he said, "No, I'm already making money hand over fist on the ebook. Why do I need you to come in and take a cut? But if we want to talk about the print book, we could talk about that." And they said, "We don't do that." And he said, "Then we don't need to talk." And they said, "Well, maybe we do that." There have been a few very successful cases of that, of successful ebooks that the print company purchased the print rights without the ebook rights. They don't like it, and it's very unlikely to happen, but it's an example of slicing the rights. But notice again, they didn't care. Readers don't care for the most part. Readers don't care where it appeared first. They care about, can I read it now? Who it matters to is the editors of those magazines. So if I take a story to Trevor at Analog and say, "I've got this great story for you, and I published it on my webpage already," Trevor's going to say, we don't do reprints, and that's a reprint. So it matters there, but also there's no legal definition of first rights and second rights, really. There isn't. It is entirely in the opinion of the editor. Two different editors might look at the same story, and one thinks that first rights have been used up and the other does not. And it's all about a contract between you and them. If they are willing to sign the contract that says 8 cents, you're getting 8 cents. If they say, "I won't sign an 8-cent contract and we don't do reprints," then you're getting nothing. If they say, "I will do a reprint," that's fine. But that really is in the discretion of the individual editor. There is no particular definition for what first rights really means. I can speak to one very specific example, which is Writers of the Future, where, full disclosure, I am a slush reader there, which is why I kind of know what's going on inside for some of these decisions. Writers of the Future has a minimum number of copies distributed before they consider it a professional sale. I think it's 5,000 copies, something like that. So you might get away with it in Writers of the Future. You've got an additional complication there, however. The slush is supposed to be anonymous. So if you think there's a good chance that the slush readers would have seen your story already, then it's kind of, you've used up first rights. It's still more complicated. I will give some insight into the back room at Writers of the Future. If I see your story show up and I know it's you, I don't throw it away, but I put it back in the queue and say, "I can't read this story. Someone else needs to read it." Since we have multiple slush readers, as long as one of us has never seen it before, and Jody, who is the judge finally deciding who the finalists are, if Jody and one judge have never seen it before, then it is still technically an unpublished story with first rights there. I can't speak for what it's like at any other market. I would say on the safe side, though, if you put it on your blog or on your social media, consider it a reprint from then on. I have a few that I've done that with. It's just, okay, I'm going to call this a reprint from now on. I am at a point now where I am, when I'm in the mood, we all have our moods and we all have our ups and downs. When I'm in the mood, I can reproduce short stories, news stories relatively quickly. It is not unusual for me to do 3,000 to 5,000 words a day. So if I do that consistently, that I'm doing 3,000 words a day, then I could do a week of 3,000 word stories, give away one to draw attention, and have four left to sell. When I'm on top of the game, lately, and I don't want to blame my stroke, but it seems like since my stroke, I'm not producing anywhere close to that rate. I don't blame the stroke. I blame the fact that I've got a million things going on. So that's, again, going back to goals. For me, giving up one story for the potential audience for the other four satisfies a goal. But there is no legal definition here for whether that is consumed first rights or not. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
All right. Related to social media, and interestingly enough, you go back, again, you get slightly different results from the different editors on this, is mailing list publication, whether it's MailChimp, MailerLite, Substack, or whatever, that you're sending out stories to a selective readership. Now, you're probably not making money on this, but you might. Again, if you get enough audience, you might be able to sell ads on your mailing list. You might be able to promote your other books. You better believe if I'm sending out stuff to my mailing list, I'm going to mention the stuff they can pay for. Some people even have paid subscriptions, especially with something like Substack. So there might be money in mailing list publication. For me, it's primarily promotion again. It is a way to find readers, but slowly, and build fans, but slowly. It's going to depend to a degree on what your platform is and how you're setting it up. I am starting to move to Substack because Substack makes it really easy that if a reader likes what they read on my Substack, they can share it on theirs. And all of a sudden, I'm being exposed to, all of their readers. So I believe that I will build readers faster with Substack than I was with MailerLite, where they have to have already come looking for me and signed in and so on, that they have decided to opt into these messages. Whereas when I'm posting Substack, they still have to opt in for me, but they could also opt in for my friend Mona Lisa, who might share my story there. And by opting in there and her choosing it to share it, I'm not sending them email. I am respecting their privacy, but she has the right to tell them about things. So the readership building might be faster with a mailing list like that. That's my hope, which is why I'm moving to Substack over the next month. Mailing lists can give you feedback, analyzable feedback, if you work at it. And this is where I fall short. I don't work at it. But the reports, the tools, pretty much all will give you reports of how many people read the thing, how many opened it, how many clicked links to see more details, how many clicked out of it on promotional links, and so on. So a mailing list has more content data you can act upon than a social media typically does. So this might meet goals for you and might be enough to make you happy. Again, I will be using my mailing list to send out some of these instant Bard stories and other things, which are kind of reader magnets. You may have heard that term bandied around about in the writing community. Reader magnets are stories you give away because you're trying to magnetize them and draw readers in. So this can satisfy some goals. I will give you free of charge my latest scheme, for which I have zero data. I don't know that this will work, but it can't hurt me to try with a few stories to see what happens. And you need to, when I say a few, you need to give it some serious try. Nothing works the first few times. But the concept often with reader magnets has never worked for me. The concept is, hi, we just met at this convention. I will give you a free story if you sign up for my mailing list. Do you know how many people in the 6 years I've been trying have signed up for my mailing list that way? Zero. Zero people. There was an interesting study early in the days of e-commerce, early in the days of Amazon, where there were arguments over the right way to set up online commerce for people. And pretty much everybody had at least one thing they understood, which is you have to have an account to buy stuff. And so they would make you set up the account first. And what Amazon discovered was many people don't want to go through that because there's a hassle in setting up an account. Just let them shop. Don't make them have to do a bunch of stuff and fill in a bunch of forms before they can shop. Let them shop. And when they find that lemon flavored ice cream that you can only get online and they think they want that, they're so excited about it. And now you say, to buy that, you need to set up an account, and they're much more likely to do it. And this is now pretty much the standard across all of e-commerce, which is you can shop. You don't have to set up the account until you decide you're interested. Well, what are we doing with mailing lists when we're trying to use the old reader magnet approach of give me your name and email address and I'll give you a story? We are making them go through the account first. So my experiment this summer is I am going to have a big QR code at all my events, which says free story, no strings attached. And if they visit that website, they get the free story. And at the bottom, they have links to some of my other stories and links to subscribe to the website and so on. There are things at the bottom to say, hey, if you like this, here's where you can learn more. I'm flipping it around from the reader magnet that you have to sign up for to the reader magnet you can just have and maybe you'll want more. And it's just a URL. So if you want to share it with your friends, so your friends get all the free stories, I don't care. Because I am exposing my other content to all of them. So if 100,000 people read my free story and a typical conversion rate on an ad campaign is maybe 1%, that's 1,000 people who go out to buy something else. So when you see my links for my free stories, if you want to share them with your friends, give them away. So I think mailing list has some potential better than social media. It is more work. Another reason why I'm switching to Substack is it's less work for me than MailerLite, which was less work and also cheaper than MailChimp. Substack is cheaper than both and easier than both and makes it very easy to turn around and share my content on Substack back to my social media. All right. Then we get into actual subscribers beyond subscribing to mailing lists. This stuff like Patreon. There are other platforms out there. Patreon is the only one anybody really talks about a lot, where somebody is paying in advance to say, I want to see your stuff and support you in your work. I've never set one up. I have just never quite made that jump. I have friends who have. I have friends who are doing pretty well with it. I have mentors who 5 years ago would never have considered it and are doing it now. So I think things have changed. The beauty of this in part is, okay, now we are talking money. Now, how much money is your Patreon subscription? Probably not a lot unless you're like really famous, but it's some money actually coming in already. What it isn't is a way to find stories, find readers and build fans in the way that something like Substack is. With Substack, if I put that out there and Mona Lisa likes it and Mona Lisa shares it, people are going to find me. Nobody wanders through Patreon. Okay, I'm sure somebody does. Tools, not rules. But essentially, nobody wanders through Patreon looking for things to subscribe to. You need another way to reach them, which might be your Substack. It might be your social media. You need a way to draw them there to look at it so that they might become subscribers. The feedback is much more direct. When you're signing on for subscriber publication, be aware that you are now setting up kind of a one-on-one relationship with that subscriber. They're expecting more access to you. They're expecting more conversation, either direct or to the group. and you have to be ready to feed the beast. Because if you're not producing stuff on a regular enough basis, if you're not communicating on a regular enough basis, you lose those subscribers. But A, it is money coming in, and B, it is feedback, which means it might meet some of your goals. Certainly, if your goal is to have readers who care, subscriber publication is a good way to do that. Now, if you put out your Patreon and nobody ever subscribes, my apologies. It happens a lot. It's one of the reasons I haven't done it. I'm just not sure anybody would actually subscribe on that. Your blog publication is a little different from all of the above. When you have a blog of your own or a hosted blog, it takes very little money to get set up, relatively, and very little money comes out of it. Again, unless you're big enough to get ads or something like that. And finding readers and building fans is very slow. Your feedback, you can get some. I get a few comments on my blog. Okay, I get many comments on my blog, which are 97% spammers from foreign countries. So it doesn't have a lot of innate growth. You have to promote it and push it, but it does create an author page, an author presence. Yesterday, Dawn Ray Ammon, the other half of FireCon, along with Jenna, Dawn Ray gave a presentation in my local user group on SEO for writers, and not the big, fancy, ridiculously complicated SEO tools, simple SEO tools that we can all do today. And one of them was about having a presence where people can find you. If they hear about your work, a place they find you that is you, that you control, that you decide what goes there, you decide the message, and that you try to emphasize that and make that your place for people to find you, because you then aren't at the mercy of algorithms that can change and people who can decide that, no, they don't want to support you anymore. On your page, you have control. And so I am right now looking at a dual thing of the blog and the Substack. Substack because of the discoverability, the blog because it is my control, and I can put up pages to sell particular books and so on. So those are some of the reasons why I'm doing it, some of the goals it meets for me. And this leads finally to self-publication, which is not a dirty word like somebody would have thought it was 15 years ago. Your Kindle and Barnes & Noble or Ingram or Vella, I guess I got to take Vella off this slide now. Vella's dead. Wattpad, others similar sorts of things. Places you can publish to go out to a commercial market where readers can find it and pay for it, or depending on the platform, not pay for it. But there's potentially money involved here. But you got to do all the promotion. Do not expect that any of these platforms are promoting you unless you strike lightning, just like I did with my story. You strike lightning and people start talking about it, and that's great. Remember dreams versus goals. That's a dream. The goal is something achievable, which is putting the stuff out there so that people might discover it. There tends not to be a lot of feedback until you start building the readership. It's kind of a paradox of, once you have readers talking about it, you can build readers talking about it. It gives you something to point to, an actual physical book that you can point to. So I can come out and reach and show this because I am absolutely tickled with it. Oh, sure. I say that. Oh, I don't have my, well, I have this one. I can show that I've got this one. I was talking about my new one, but this is the one that came out last week. Garden Paths, stories inspired by the sculptures at Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park. And so I am now able to point to this, hand out copies. Today at the bonsai show at the gardens, I gave copies to 3 people who are in various places, various positions at the park, including the vice president of the park, to show them, this is what I love about your park. These are my stories. So it's a thank you. And if it happens to also be something that they look at and say, hey, I want to tell other people about this, that's great. So it's something you can point to. When you're doing this, if you're publishing to Amazon, do not overlook your Amazon page. Make sure your Amazon page has got links to other stuff you've done in other places. Make sure your Amazon page has a biography that includes all of your latest stuff, because part of the self-publication is to have things out there discoverable. And if they only discover the one book, that's better than zero. But if you've got other stuff, you want them to be able to find that. So make sure you keep an eye on your Amazon page. And if you go to other places, Barnes & Noble, BAM, make sure that you are well linked on these pages and contact them about setting up the links if they're not. So this meets some of your goals. It's meeting mine. I am now up to 4 books, 4 full-length books, self-published. I've also got 3 traditionally published, and I've got short stories all over the place. So it's meeting some of my goals, because one of the things you get with self-publication is complete control. Now, that's good and that's bad. That means that if there's a mistake, who's to blame? You. But it also means that I decide what goes in it. I decide what it looks like. I decide what I am selling here in a way that you don't get with traditional publishing. With traditional publishing, so much of the decisions are made without regard to you, even if you don't like them. If you think your cover stinks, well, too bad. That's our budget for covers this month. We're going to buy something off of DeviantArt, and it's a beautiful picture and has nothing to do with your story, but we think it'll draw readers. They might be right, but with self-publishing, you get to decide. The story behind Garden Paths, for those of you who haven't heard it before, Frederick Meyer Gardens and Sculpture Park is one of the 10 best sculpture parks in the world. Depends which survey you read, but it's generally in the top 10 sculpture parks in the world. And it's in my backyard practically. And I love sculpture. And it has inspired me to write a bunch of stories based on something like 20 of those sculptures. I forget the exact number. And I had originally put it together illustrated with photos of the sculpture, until I discovered that, oh, the cost of that, the license for each photo of the sculpture to appear in the book is $500. 32 photos, $16,000. I have never made and never expect to make, unless I strike lightning, never expect to make $16,000 on a self-published book, or for that matter, most traditional published books. So that is something that I said, sorry, I can't do that. I will come up with my own cover instead. This is an image licensed from Dreamstime, which is a good site for stock photo. And if I can get it to get closer to the camera, it is a plant in a pot that happens to be sort of topiary, shaped in the form of a dancer. I decided that. I said that is a pretty good picture for the concept of a horticultural gardens full of beautiful sculpture. So that satisfied many goals for me. It did not satisfy I want this beautiful book with all these photos of all this beautiful sculpture, because that was a dream. This is a goal.
Martin, where did you say you got that photo from?
Dreamstime, DREAMSTIME.com. It is by no means the only stock photo site out there. There's Getty Images. There is, now I've lost one. There's one that's bigger than Dreamstime. The secret is 90+% of the pictures on any of these stock photo sites, I think, is across all the sites, because the artists don't want to miss out on potential market. Dreamstime has a couple of different plans. They have a monthly subscription plan and a monthly with rollover. So if you don't use all the images in a month, they're available the next month. But you get so many image download credits per month that you can go and search and pull those down. You can choose between photos and illustrations, and they've even got videos and such. You can go by searching by themes. A lot of different search criteria. Important one for me, I'm not telling you your morality, but it is important to me that they have a box to turn off, say, I don't want any AI images in the search results, because they do if you search for something, they will try to give you an AI image that's exactly what you search for. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying I don't want it. And I am slightly annoyed with Dreamstime because that box always is on for show me AI until I turn it off every single time. But the cost for an image through Dreamstime, they've got the monthly subscription is one program, and I think it's like $15 a month for a certain number of downloads, more than I will ever need. They've got another one, which is you just pay quote unquote credits. A credit is roughly $1. And you pay a certain number of credits for a particular image. The artist prices their image. The most I've ever paid for a Dreamstime image is about $15. So no, it's not art actually created for my book, but I just about couldn't have asked for a better picture for my book than this one, because I spent a couple of hours searching on Dreamstime with different keyword searches and turn off the AI again and kept searching and searching. And I found this artist who actually has the same theme with many different things. There's a dancing couple, there's a heart, there's two hands surrounding a globe, all in this style of sort of, now I've just lost the term, the topiary, all in this sort of a topiary style. And so if I were to do another book in this series, you better believe I'm going back to her and looking for another image so that there's a style consistency there. If you look at some of my early self-published short stories and my collection Blue Collar Space, many of those are illustrated by an artist by the name of Luca Oleastri, who I found through Dreamstime. And then when he realized I was using many of his images, he came and sort of tapped me on the electronic shoulder and said, "I can do better than that." I said, "Really? Yeah, that one there, it's okay the way you did it. You cropped it and so on in a way that's pretty good. I still have the original rendering files, and I can move that spacecraft from way out here to way in here, which lets you put the space station centered smack dab on the front cover." And I don't remember a price he charged for that, but it was like, that's not much more expensive than just getting it on Dreamstime. And then he turned around and sold me a whole cover design for a price I'm not allowed to quote, but it is significantly less than his normal because we'd established this reputation. Later, I discovered Luca Oleastri, Italian artist, is also very big of an artist in Italy, and also a publisher of Italian science fiction. I wouldn't have discovered him if I didn't happen to love his work on Dreamstime. I am an old school Apollo era person in my head for what the future looks like, and he's painting the pictures in my head. Other questions? Okay. Then crowdsource publication, which is Kickstarter and other crowdsourcing events. Again, Kickstarter is the big one most everybody has heard of, where now you are doing self-publication, but only if enough people sign up to say, "We want that," and they pay the money in advance. And so this doesn't put you in as much financial risk, except for the risk that you might not fund and you don't get any money at all, which is itself useful marketing feedback. If you find that you can't take your idea and get a bunch of readers to buy it ahead of time, then maybe your idea doesn't meet a commercial goal. It might meet berry goals where it satisfies you in your artistic soul, but it's not satisfying you in terms of finance. You have to promote to get this money, and if you're getting it or not. If your campaign is working or not. You get really great feedback along the way. You might even get bonuses. Dean Wesley Smith has a pre-recorded, workshop on Kickstarters, which is now, I think, 4 years old, which means the whole thing has changed since then. So I don't know if he's done a new one recently. But he talks about these different goals of ways you can get Kickstarter's attention so they might promote your work for you. And all of a sudden you get a whole bunch of audience that you didn't have before. And I've seen this work for people, and I saw it fail miserably for me. I was happy with the Kickstarter I ran. I think I had something like 45 contributors, And of them, 43 were people I knew before the campaign started. So I got zero of this bonus visibility that Dean talks about. But you can get it. If you got a project that funds quickly, that draws the right attention, you can all of a sudden get a whole bunch of people. Obviously, the legend of this was Brandon Sanderson getting his $42 million off of his Kickstarter that even Brandon never expected he'd get that much. You're not getting $42 million. I measure Kickstarter campaigns in terms of millibrandons. If you can get a millibrandon, you've got a pretty good Kickstarter, because that's a $42,000 Kickstarter. Man, I would love to have a Kickstarter campaign that reached the millibrandon level. Part of the reason why Brandon does that is because he already had the success, so he had readers, and he had a staff and infrastructure, because it is a hell of a lot of work to get this crowdsourced publication going. There's a lot of things you have to do before the campaign. There's things you have to do during the campaign. You have commitments and your expectations that you have to meet after the campaign, and your reputation is on the line. But it does, like self-publication in general, give you something to point at when you're done, to say, hey, this is my book that accomplished this, and maybe you'd like to buy it now outside of the campaign. I can sell it to you too. So crowdsourced publication has worked for many people. It worked for me, but it didn't blow up for me. I probably made more money than I would have without it, but not a lot. What it did do is it paid for a cover from Luca, a cover for that book that I'm not sure I could have afforded without the campaign. So that's a possibility there. So those are all the ways of doing it yourself. And as soon as I say those are all the ways, somebody's going to invent a new one. Handing out pamphlets on a street corner. I guess that's not a new one. I guess that one goes back a long way. I'm not sure how you're going to make any money at it, but it's another one. But maybe you want a publisher. Maybe you don't want to do all that work. Maybe you grew up in the mindset that if it's not published by a publisher, it isn't real. Now, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I'm going to tell you that there are lots of ways to be published, and you can do your way, but respect the fact that other people are doing some amazing things in other paths. For some people, finding the publisher is the way to go. And my first 3 novels are traditionally published. I've got one in the hands of a traditional publisher right now. I've got one that I will be sending to a traditional publisher if I can ever get back to my dictation and finish the thing. I see nothing wrong with traditional publishing. I just choose to have other paths. In the world of traditional publishing, there's an option we don't discuss a lot among authors out there in the author community, but it's there: local media. Publishing in your local newspaper or your local arts journal or some other local media option. There ain't going to be a lot of money in it. There just ain't. Those places don't make a lot of money. They're living on small amounts of advertising, small amounts of subscribers, maybe even Patreons or patrons supporting them. So there's not a lot of money in local media and not a huge audience. I've got a local newspaper I could probably submit stuff to still, and I'll bet they have a readership of 300 people. And a website where more people can come to, but I don't know how many ever do. So it's a small audience, but the local might have benefit to you. If you're writing on things that you think are of local interest, you're able to reach out to those people and get feedback from them. And it's good practice. Going back to Dean, Dean says practice is treated like a dirty word in the writing community, which is just dumb. Just dumb. If you are a singer, you practice your chords and your scales and your old reliable standbys and your new songs all the time. You improvise. If you're a dancer, you're out there doing steps. If you're a painter, you're painting studies of landscapes and still lives and whatnot. And this is all part of your process of improving and tuning your art. And if you're a writer, somebody out there somewhere is looking over your shoulder and saying, why aren't you submitting that for publication? Why aren't you making money off of this? Does the singer who sings while they're walking through a park get paid for it? Writing for practice is just as important for us as singing for practice is for them. Local media can be a good form of practice where you are trying out ideas in a local community and seeing if people respond. Now, there's no way I'm going to list all the possible local media places. I can probably find 8 or 10 within the 3-county area where I spend most of my time. They're everywhere. You will have to do your own research on this. Does it meet your goals? If your goal is to be read, to get feedback, to have people notice what you're doing, local media meets some of those goals. Writer's Market. Writer's Market was, and I'm emphasizing was, the old traditional answer. Now, today, it is the old traditional answer. And I feel sad saying this because I remember for years where every 2 or 3 years, because they didn't go out of date that fast, somebody would get me Writer's Market for Christmas. And I was so happy. It's a great big thick book, size of an old-fashioned dictionary, full of markets for different types and so on and so on and so on. And inspirational essays and how-to essays and contact information and everything. And just that was the book. That was the book. I had to have that book. When I started getting serious about my writing, I started looking into the latest Writer's Market. And I'll tell you the one that pushed me over the edge. They had a listing for Analog Science Fiction Magazine, one of the top 3 science fiction magazines out there. And it said information about pay rate and so on and so on and so on. And they had a listing for Asimov Science Fiction Magazine, which is one of the leading science fiction magazines out there with all the information about pay rates and blah, 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 blah. Both of them were dated and they didn't agree with each other, even though Analog and Asimov's are owned by the same publisher with the exact same pay rates and everything. And I started looking in more detail and discovered that most of the listings in Writer's Market were out of date. They were not well kept up. They were just not as useful. It's a difference between, imagine if you are looking for, let's just say news. Do you go to CNN.com or do you go to the annual almanac? The almanac might have something interesting in it. Great overviews of the past year. But the almanac comes out once a year and you're not going to see anything new and fresh in it. Unfortunately, I believe Writer's Market at this point is in that almanac category. Wow, it's 10 after 5. I had no idea I'd been blathering for this long. My apologies if I'm blathering. A modern equivalent to that had been Rallan. And I had to cross out everything on this slide because Rallan shut down 2 years ago. But I still want to acknowledge that for, 26 years, Rallan privately, no support, I don't think they had ads or anything. It was a private passion effort to list markets that were looking for science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So I used to have those on this slide, and now, unfortunately, Rallan is gone, but not forgotten. Now, an alternative to Rallan, it's been around a while, is Duotrope. Duotrope.com. Duotrope started as this really cool site that was supported by donations. And they didn't need a lot of donations. They did not need a lot of donations to keep running, and they couldn't get any donations. I was an exception. I treated them kind of like an agent. If I sold a story that I found the market on Duotrope, I sent Duotrope 10% of what I sold it for because I found it through them. Unfortunately, Duotrope has now had to go to a pay model that is based on a very simple payment rate. It's $50 per year, or you can sign up for a month for $5. They even have an option for clubs, for groups, that if, for instance, 10 of you want to get a Duotrope membership, you can get it for $375 for 12 months. So that is, what's that, like a 15%, something like that, discount. They have, at last count, nearly 5,000 fiction markets, 5,000 nonfiction, poetry, 3,600, and even visual art listings. That they are a place for artists to try to find work as well. Now, I'm told by Lazarus Chernick, who is one of the judges at Writers or at Illustrators of the Future, that their visual art stuff they have is not that fun. It is piecework stuff, but you know, sometimes piecework pays the bills this week so you can do the fun stuff. And they have all of this and agents. So if you're looking for agents, there's an option for you to look for agents. Their argument, and I have found this to be believable, is because they are charging a very small amount. I mean, that's a Starbucks coffee per month. Because they are charging this small amount, they are getting people contributing to their information who care enough about their career to have some investment into it. By caring about the investing and what that does for the information, the place keeps track of where you sent stuff and whether or not you got accepted or rejected and how quick the answers came back and so on. So that when you go searching for markets, they are providing statistical information about, hey, how often does this place respond? How quickly do they respond? So you go and look and you say, okay, this market typically responds in, okay, 12 months. Let me talk about an example. I love Alfred Hitchcock and Ellery Queen mystery magazines. They're two of the slowest places on the planet. It can literally be 12 months before they respond. They may say 3 months on their website, but it can be 12 months before they respond. So I have to look and say, do I want to submit there and have them sit on that story for 12 months before I can shop it around again? Because the people contributing this information are people who are a little more invested in their career in terms of an actual financial stake, so that you're making enough money to think this matters, I believe that Duotrope is giving me better data than their competition, Submission Grinder, which, yes, it's free, but I have seen whole markets that Submission Grinder doesn't have listed. I can't trust a place that's going to miss important markets. And for me, again, $5 per month is, I am thinking, at a point where I'm selling stuff on a reasonable basis. To me, it's a good investment. You go with the one you want to trust and decide on. To me, it might be more effective for your career to find 10 friends and call yourself a writing group and get the discounted subscription to Duotrope for your writing group. And as the group size goes up, the discount gets a little better, but I put down the 10 member discount as an example. So these are places for finding markets for your work. Now, there are other places. Facebook, this is just a list of Facebook groups that I am part of that have open calls on a regular basis. Some of them are scam, and the moderators try to look for those scams. The moderators for all of these groups try very hard to make sure that the calls are for paying markets that actually have some semblance of professionalism in their listings. Open call for science fiction, fantasy, and pulp is a really good one that I follow a lot. I see some pretty good calls there. Open call for horror, science fiction, and fantasy. It's like, aren't those the same thing? Well, one is pulp, one is horror. You'll often see people advertising and promoting in both. For horror, paranormal, mystery, and sci-fi, I don't go to that one often. The open submissions for short story writers I found during a web search. Never been involved there. Open submission calls for romance writers. I confess, I have written one romance short story because my local writing group was doing a romance anthology. So I wrote a romance short story. I don't have a lot of romance I can send to. So I'm aware of this group. I'm not personally participating. And that's just a tiny little list. You want to do the searching. When you're looking for the Facebook groups for this, look at the rules and see what they're requiring. Are they setting some sort of reasonable standard for stuff that's going to be paying professional markets? Now, again, that's if your goal is to get paid. If your goal is to be something else, some other form of exposure, you might want to look at some other groups. When you're looking at trying to sell your stuff to other languages, other markets. And I have not checked this in a few months. If it's gone defunct, my apologies, but it's been there for a lot of years. Douglas Smith, who is a short story writer, primarily in the science fiction area, has built an entire list of foreign markets which pay for English language stories to be translated. Now, the way this is done at all the reputable ones is they pay you. It's probably not even penny a word, but it's definitely low rates, but they pay the translator, which is a real savings on your part. That's why they're paying you so little, because they have to pay the translators, and translators have to eat too. And good translators really have to eat. So he has this long list of markets that are open to English language submissions, and he keeps track of, have they been having issues reported lately? Have they been responding to emails? Have they been so long since they responded that now we're going to consider them out of date, and so on? So Doug Smith has a really good place for you to take your stuff. Very seldom are you going to find a foreign market taking a story which hasn't been published in English first. They've got plenty of stories written in their own language in their own country. What they're interested in is stories that made a mark in the English market, and now they think, well, I can take this a little farther. And this is how I have some of my 8 translations of Today I Am Paul. Some of them came through Doug Smith's market, where I went and said, oh, here's a place I want to send that. Writer groups are wonderful, whether it's online or in person, because we share news with each other all the time. We talk about our different places where we're selling stuff. We talk about other things that are useful beyond the marketing. Here are 3 groups that I am part of in one fashion or another, and I know some of you from these groups. Superstars, their online writing community, only open to those who are alumni of Superstars in the past. So there's a group URL, but you won't be let in if you're not a past attendee. I really recommend you attend Superstars if you're at a point where you're serious about selling stuff. Superstars has a little on how to write, but they have a lot on how to sell and self-publish and promote and manage the business side of things. Apex Writers Group, originally formulated by Dave Wolverton when he was with us. Their online group is also only open to members. So if you join Apex, there is a yearly fee. I haven't paid attention to what it is recently. They have regular meetings to discuss business and craft topics. If you are a member of that, you are also a member of the Facebook group. And Writer Dojo is one that is open to anybody. Any of you can go visit the Writer Dojo. It's not a subscriber sort of thing. They will ask you a couple of very basic screening questions, which you can get if you pay attention to the site, just to make sure they're filtering out people who are there who are just somebody in some foreign country hired to spam the group. Writer Dojo was formed by Larry Correia and Steve Diamond to teach writing advice that they felt was being neglected in the community. There's, I don't know, 5 or 6 years of past episodes of their podcast that you can find through the group. And the group supports each other through this Facebook group. That's only 3 of what has to be 1,000+ writer groups on Facebook. Of those 3, I recommend you start with Writer Dojo first, because you can get into it without having to be part of another community already. Those are great other communities, but Writer Dojo, you can get your foot in the door today. So those are places where you can look for markets relatively easily. This last section I call detective work. It works, but you have to dig a little harder. One of them, and I claim full credit for this one. I'm sure somebody else did it for me, but nobody taught me this. I discovered it myself. I was looking for markets for mysteries because, again, Queen and Hitchcock can be a year each before they respond. And I'm like, and at least in terms of Duotrope, they're the only 2 professional paying writer markets out there. And I said, there's got to be more people than that publishing, or mystery markets. There's got to be more people than that publishing mysteries. And I found a year's best anthology, Best American Mysteries. And I said, wait a minute, year's best anthology is stuff that was already published once, and they thought it was cool enough to publish again. and they always list the credits of where the stuff was published. And so this is a screenshot from the year's best anthology I picked up. And I'm looking for like people that published in Hitchcock and Queen. And it's like, okay, so here's this one that was first published in Biblio Mysteries from Mysterious Press. Here's something that first published in Cincinnati Review. That's local media, but it's a little bigger than the local media in my town. Here's something that was first published in Tin House, which is a mystery anthology publisher that I didn't know about. And another one in Red Dawn, Best New England Crime Stories. Here in the year's best anthology are places that, depending on the anthology, might have published between them 30 mysteries that year. And now I've got 30 new markets for mysteries. Guess what? The year's best anthology that I picked up had one from Queen and one from Hitchcock. The rest were other markets. Mystery doesn't tend to be siloed as much into specialty markets. You get mysteries in a lot of markets that don't call themselves mystery magazines. So the best of anthologies, great place to find places that bought work like yours. Contests. I did mention I am a slush reader and a huge proponent of Writers of the Future. So I certainly believe in contests. Writers of the Future, and when I won, gave me a great boost in my career. But I do want you to be aware of some things when you're looking at contests. One is entry fees. Remember, tools, not rules. But my rule is if it charges an entry fee, you don't want to be there. Now, have I ever paid an entry fee? Yes, a couple of times people talked me into it, and I kind of felt like the critique that I got almost justified it. But as a general rule, when a contest starts charging entry fees, there is a tendency for them then to want lots of subscriptions, which means lots and lots of fees. And some of them become more about the fees than about the contest. So you got to watch out for that. You got to watch out for lost rights. And this is particularly common in local communities. And I'm not saying you can't do this. I'm saying make the conscious decision that you're willing to lose your first rights for the sake of a contest. Because in many, many local writing contests, they love to have a community choice or a people's choice. And so they select a bunch of finalists and they publish them online so people can vote. Not realizing that first rights are gone now. Some of them will claim the rights to publish everything that gets sent in. By virtue of you sending it to them, they're going to publish it. You've just lost first rights. Now, again, sometimes I'm okay with that. Sometimes I give stuff away for free. Be aware that you are doing this in that sort of a contest. That if you really think this is a great story, maybe you should be holding on to the first rights and sending it someplace else. A famous story about Heinlein, which is kind of almost true. It's a little more complicated than that. But the story that was told for many years before we learned the truth behind it was that his very first story was written for a contest, and he sweated and sweated over that, came up with something he thought was so good that he thought it didn't need to be in a contest, and he proceeded to send it to the competitor of the magazine holding the contest and sold it for more than the contest was offering because it was that good of a story. What's not quite true about that is it really isn't his very first story. If you read his full biography, he had a few things that came before that just weren't ready. But the first one he had that was ready, he did better trying to sell it than put it in a contest. And I have a friend who is a pretty good writer. He likes to submit to these local contests. I'm like, I think you could do better. Yeah, but this is what I'm comfortable with. So if that's his reasoning, great. But be aware of what you are giving up along the process. And some contests are worse. So keep in mind writerbeware.blog. It's a great resource to identify writing scams and to look things up. Now, some of the upsides for these contests certainly is visibility. In a local contest, you're getting local visibility. In a national contest, if you're Writers of the Future, you're getting promoted the heck out of for months after it comes out if you win. And you will be part of a community who is supporting you for a long time after that. So there's visibility and there's some sales out of that. Now, most often the money for the sale is going to the contest, but potentially you'll sell other stuff coming out of it. So the contests have value and they have risks. For me, Writers of the Future, and there are some others along those lines, what's it called? Dreamforge contest. These have some value beyond, gee, I am submitting this story. And I could get some attention in my community. So it could meet some of your goals. Conventions. If you are the type who can go out and socialize with a bunch of strangers, because not everybody is, a convention is a great place to meet editors, which often jumps you ahead of the line in a lot of ways. It doesn't put you in the front of the line, but you can get a chance to submit to an editor who knows you by name and has given you an email address, and you can send to them directly, maybe, or at least you can refer back to them in correspondence and so on. You can also find small presses. Small presses should be on my list here, but there are so many of them, and they come and go, sadly, so fast that you kind of can't tell which ones will still be around next year. But meeting some of them and getting a chance to get in their anthologies, that happens a lot at conventions. If you are going to conventions, maybe get involved, especially if you're the type who's kind of a little shy about joining a new group. Volunteering for the convention gives you a social group before you ever get there. I did a couple of times at Worldcon. I did leading walking tours for people wanting to get up and do exercise. I did walking tours. So I got to walk with people from all across the convention, leading them on a tour, talking about the sites in the area and so on. So it gave me a natural hook to talk to a bunch of strangers. And then there's stalking, but stalking in a very good way. When you have writers, especially friends, but when you have writers you just kind of casually know, follow them on your social media. Follow them, see what they're doing, see where they sell, and then query those places. And it took me a long time to figure this one out and go to Mike Resnick. Sorry, we've lost Mike now, but talk to Mike Resnick at the time of, hey, I saw you sold this story to this foreign market. So I sent one to them and they bought it. And he said, took you long enough. Stalking is a perfectly valid thing to do. Looking where people you know are selling is places that are buying. Besides Mike Resnick, I sold a Today I'm Paul to a Dutch market because I saw my friend Eric James Stone had just sold a story there. And I said, ooh, there's a market I haven't heard of. It wasn't on Doug Smith's list, so I'm going to send to them. So stalking your friends and trying to sell to the same markets, perfectly legitimate approach. All right, and we are well over time, but hopefully I'm providing some good value here. I want to talk about some niche markets that I think are really worth your attention, but always confirm. Things come and go out of business. I once had a really perfect story for a market, and it was exactly what they published month after month after month, and I sent it to them, and they said, yeah, we published too many like this, and so we're looking for something else. And it's like, it was what was in their mission statement. And they said, we're looking for something else, and a month later, they never published another issue. So always confirm, but I'm going to talk about a few anthologies and few places you can send stuff that are worth attention. One is Raconteur Press, who I think might be verging on 2 years now. It is a bunch of longtime fans and friends who have been themselves selling stories for a long time and so on, and some of them self-publishing and so on. And they said, you know, we have the expertise among this group to put together and publish anthologies. And so they do very frequent themed anthology calls. It might be space westerns. It might be big guns. It might be all sorts of different themes. And they have, I swear they've got a call a month or pretty close to it. Generally, it's science fiction and fantasy stuff. And they are setting some pretty good sales records, sales landmarks in the process. So Raconteur, as long as they stay in business, because again, they happen steady, they can get lost. But Raconteur Press is one I think is worth your check. Zombies Need Brains has actually been around a lot longer than Raconteur. They don't publish as frequently, but they've been publishing for a long time with anthologies that are making some splash in the market. Again, generally themed in the calls in the science fiction, fantasy, and horror range. Baen Books anthologies. I really, 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 I wish I could give you a place to submit to the Baen Books anthologies, but I can't. They do not do open calls. What they do, going back to that going to conventions things, is the editors send out invitations to people they know and believe have stuff to say. And so going and getting to know them at these events is a way to possibly get opportunities to be in these anthologies. Gary Goldstein is a Hollywood deal maker who spoke at Dave Wolverton's Apex Writers Group one time, where he says the secret to actually building long-term business is relationships over deals. Deals are great, but good deals come out of good relationships, getting to know people. And when you get to know people, eventually opportunities will come up for people to help each other. So get to know the Baen editors. I have now been in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think I've been in 8 Baen anthologies because the people know me, and I follow through by giving good results when they invite me to things. Baen also has 2 contests. In the spring, they have a hard science fiction contest. In the summer, they have a fantasy contest. These have no fees. They are open. They are open to anybody who hasn't already won one. Okay, and if you've won fantasy, you can still send to science fiction and vice versa. They're open to anybody, and you get a certain amount of promotion coming out of it. If you win, you get publication on their site. You get promotion in the trade press and so on. So there's a contest. The hard science fiction one is very specific in its criteria. They're looking for stories that will inspire the next generation of space exploration. So no magic, no unicorns, no alien invasions. It needs to be inspiring stories about humanity going to space. And if your story doesn't fit that, you'll find another market for it. The fantasy one is very specifically fantasy adventure. So if your fantasy story involves someone in a Lovecraftian library and slowly seeing their brain turn to mush because of the books they're reading, that's probably not adventure. But if your story involves their brain turning into mush and that mush turning into a monster that chases them out of the library, maybe that's adventure. Rise of the Future, I mentioned before, no fee, quarterly contest for science fiction and fantasy, very nice prizes, including a workshop week in Hollywood where you get taught by bestsellers. Dream Foundry is an annual contest, I believe, no fee, and some pretty good prizes. You don't get a workshop like you get out of Writer's Future, but you get some really nice prizes, and you get promotion. And I left a question mark there. If anybody has a small niche market for short fiction they wanted to plug, let's wrap up with any plugs you have for that. Anybody? All right. Then let me go to my last slide. Just put together is the schedule for upcoming classes. May 18th, next week, I will be a late start on this one because next week I am starting my Instant Bard presentations, improv stories at the Renaissance Festival, and it's like 50 miles away, so I can't be sure I'll be here at 4. So she blinded me with science. It's how to get enough science to make a convincing story while recognizing that nobody can get it perfect. On May 25, for the business side, oh, hell no. Why I'm not signing that contract? I am not a lawyer. I am definitely not your lawyer. I cannot advise you legally. Somebody who can advise you legally has to be able to stand up in court and stand by their advice and face sanctions if they gave you bad advice. That ain't me. But I can tell you by looking at a particular contract, all the reasons I didn't sign this. I'm not telling you you shouldn't sign it. I am saying here's why I would never in my life sign this contract. June 1 is a repeat of something I taught for Dave Wolverton for his Apex, Humanity and Empathy in Science Fiction and other genres, but science fiction was where the talk arose from. And June 8th, I'm going to go a little different. I'm going to talk about Dave because I've mentioned him probably a dozen times here today. And I want to talk about Dave's writing, things you might still want to be looking at with his writing and his teaching. Once in a while in these classes, I'm going to do a tribute to one of my mentors, past or present, because a lot of what I'm teaching is what they taught me. So I want you knowing about them and where you can learn more from them and so on. Any questions? All right. We've gone about half hour over what I expected, but I hope it was useful information. And always remember, Martin@shoemaker.space. If you got further questions, feel free to send me a message there, or Facebook, X, whatever messaging mechanism you have, because I'm always happy to help on this. It's the pay it forward ethos. Those mentors help me. It's my job to help you. And if there are no questions, all right, in that case, let me, come on.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you. And stop our recording.